So here we are today. We're going to do the passenger side, upper control arm and lower ball joint. It's very hot in here. I'm going to try to get this done as quickly as possible. One thing you can't torque when the vehicle's in the air is the actual axle nut on the hub. This thing needs 175 foot-pounds of torque. If you try doing it in the air, it'll just spin. You do not want to put these on and tighten them down with your impact. If you over tighten these, you'll burn up the bearing hub pretty quick. You'll be replacing that thing within a year. Now, if we wanted to be super by the book, we would have replaced that nut. In my experience, that's rarely done. Shops will rarely bother to order one. That's nowhere near as big a deal as over torquing those by using an impact gun, which happens a lot. So just make sure you get the torque reasonably correct. So that's it. Both sides are done. Drives nice. Everything I showed you applies to Suburbans, Tahoes, and Silverados. If they got this this look, this generation, I think is 01 to like 06. And honestly, I think the 07s and up probably are very similar, if not exactly the same. ABS sensors clipped on up there. I'll take that off. Get this off here. ABS wire will hang down and it'll make it easier when I go to remove the hub. Slide pins, we want to put these somewhere safe, where they're not going to get any dirt or dust on them, because we don't want to introduce any of that into the caliper slide pins themselves. Okay, this caliper is going to come off pretty easy because I did these brakes not too long ago. If your caliper doesn't come off smooth, get in here and just compress the pistons a little bit, and it should lift off the rotor without too much trouble. Like that. Now we'll hang that with a wire to suspend it properly. You don't want to, you never want to leave your caliper hanging by the brake hose. It puts unnecessary stress on it. These pads are going to come off and I'm going to put them on the bench. So I want to put them back exactly where they came off. So we'll put an O for outer. That way I'm not going to get them mixed up. And you really want to try to avoid getting any grease on the pads. And if you do get any on the rotor surface, clean all that off before you send it. Grease on the rotor will get onto the pads and contaminate the pads and reduce the braking efficiency. So we got all our brake stuff out of the way, so now I can go ahead and go hog wild with the penetrating oil. PB is pretty good. You don't want to use WD-40. It's really not a penetrating oil at all. PB is pretty good. In my experience, the best is actually this stuff called Aerocroil, which tastes like cherries. Axle nut. So this next series of steps is really the hard part of the job. This is where a lot of people have problems. This whole bearing and hub assembly has to come off. It's held on by 3 15mm bolts. This one and the one on the other side, you can get a socket on. This one, you really can't. These are torqued to 133 foot-pounds. So there's a lot of torque on there. You got to get these loose, but you can't get a socket on there. Not easily anyway. A lot of the problem stems from the ball joint stud sticking down too far. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen the ball joint nut here, in here, as much as I can, and this is going to move up. It's going to move up just enough to where I can get some action on this bolt. One thing I need to note is we're dealing with a torsion bar suspension here. That's the torsion bar there. Goes into the lower control arm. That's actually a piece of a long shaft of sprung steel. So you don't have a traditional coil spring between the control arms here, but that is providing all the spring force in the suspension. So when the vehicle is raised up off the ground like this, the suspension is not compressed, and if you pop these loose, this has the potential to fly open a little rapidly and might cause you some problems. So when you're going to loosen these, preload the suspension a bit. Just compress the lower control arm. Now I can loosen these. Nothing's going to go anywhere uncontrolled. Then later I can come back, lower the jack gently and ease everything into position or out of position how I want it. Okay, we're already having some fun here. The ball joint shaft or stud is turning as I turn the nut. That's not uncommon, I guess. Unfortunately, the OEM ball joint, the way that they've designed it to stop this from happening when you disassemble, is you're supposed to put an Allen head wrench up there or bit. Well, you don't have enough room to do that. The other way to do that is to put wrench flats on there. That's a lot better. So here we're going to have to try to isolate that while we turn it. Best way to do that is some vice grips, but I got to be careful not to damage the threads or I'll just make things harder for me later. So I'm going to work on this. Thanks, GM. Well, that went from bad to worse really fast. About a half hour later and I got it off. I had to completely annihilate the nut using a combination of cutoff wheel and air chisel. It's in a really bad spot for using those tools to do this. I hate having to do that. I had to be very careful not to damage the axle boot there. But this can happen, man. This can happen anytime you're working on a car, especially front end suspension and steering stuff. If I didn't have shop air and these tools, I would have taken, I mean, I'm not saying it's not possible to get it off, but it's take a lot longer and be very frustrating. So, man, this shit can happen. You know, the other side came apart beautiful, and this one, it was working with the vice grips, and then all of a sudden it hit something in the threads and decided it was not going to go anywhere at all today. Fuck. Working on cars sucks. So the shaft is seized into the knuckle just from being pressed in there for all those years. So we're gonna have to pound that out. Ironically, the upper ball joint that gave me so much trouble, it popped right out. I mean, fuck, if you're gonna give me something easy, give me the nut off, not the stud. So like I said earlier, I got the jack compressing the lower control arm a little bit. So there's a couple of different ways to get this freed up. You can use a pickle fork, and a pickle fork would be okay here. Pickle fork jams in there, you pound on it, it separates it. It would be okay here because I'm not reusing the ball joint. You don't use a pickle fork on anything you're gonna reuse because it'll fuck it up. Other ways to do it, the air hammer. If you repeatedly air hammer in this area, sometimes it'll pop out. Or a mallet. Slam here with a mallet several times real hard, it'll pop out. Any of those three methods will get it done. So we're gonna try the air hammer method first. Just because it's the easiest. I might not be able to do it while holding the phone, but we'll see what happens here. Yeah, I can't hold it in position while holding the phone. If I'll put the phone down and I'll make it happen. I put the nut back on there to prevent it from falling all the way off when it broke loose. Was not able to use it or to do it with the air hammer this time. Yesterday, other side, air hammer did it. This time, took the BFH. That's how it's done. One note, I am wearing safety glasses anytime I'm using the hammers or the air chisel cutoff wheel or air hammer. It's hot in here, I'm sweaty, but a piece of metal in my eye would ruin my day a hell of a lot more than the mild annoyance of wearing these for 30 seconds. So wear your eye protection. You only got two eyes. They're pretty important. So now that we got the upper ball joint stud completely out, it's real easy to get to these bolts, or this top bolt. But these are torqued to 133 foot-pounds. You're not gonna be able to break them loose with a 3/8 drive gun. You gotta get your big boy 1/2 inch on there. So that's why I've got this whole contraption. So there we go. At this point, the whole thing's ready to pop out. I'll get these bolts completely unthreaded. The whole thing will just come right out. Easy. So here we are, everything is apart. We're ready to take out the actual parts we're gonna replace. One thing though that I really like to do when I'm working on my own cars, I'm not doing this professionally anymore. I don't gotta worry about the book time. I don't got a boss asking me how long it's taken or why is it taking so long. I like to really clean everything up as best I can. So this had a bunch of grease around it. I removed all that before I pound this out. And here we had a bunch of grease and stuff. And then from hammering, there's a little bit of bent up metal here. And I don't want that to rub on the boot and cut my boot up. So I'm gonna grind that down real quick, just smooth that off, take care of it. Not, getting rid of that metal is not gonna hurt the knuckle at all. But that's just, me doing it on my own. I like to pay attention to little details for my own satisfaction. A good mechanic would probably do that for you, but you don't know if he did it or not. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. You never really know what you're getting. The OEM ball joint with the 4 bent over tabs. Grind them or use a air chisel to bend them over. You can do it with a big hammer and a sledge if you don't have air. Yesterday I was able to get the other side out without using the press, just using the BFH. So I'm going to give that a try again today. We'll see how it goes. Boom. The bolts that hold the upper control arm in are also your camber adjustment. So before I start messing with these, I'm going to mark my current camber adjustment. So when I put it all back together, I have a ballpark for what's going to give me a good ride performance. It's still recommended that you get it aligned, but I did not align it after doing the other side, and I went back to my marks and it drove fine. So might not be necessary. I probably still will have an alignment done later this week. If you get it back to where you were, pretty good chance you're not going to really mess up anything or cause any tire wear problems. The big things that would really cause issues is if you went and adjusted your toe. But we're not touching the toe today. So That's a tip. Make sure you do that if you're going to get into here. That way you can at least drive it to the alignment shop without being all over the road with bad camber. Taking the upper control arm completely off, because we're replacing it anyway, gives me a perfect straight up and down geometry for installing the ball joint with the press. There it is. There we are, lower ball joint's in. The retaining snap ring is in. The Zerk fitting is in, facing aft, because that's how the OEM one was, and that's going to be how you would get your grease gun on there. If it's facing outboard or forward or inboard, you might have a problem, but aft, you will be able to get grease in there. A note, these are called Zerk fittings with a K at the end, not Zerg or Zert or Zerch. I've heard people say all those things. Call it a Zerk fitting or you sound like an idiot. Before I put the new upper control arm in, I'm going to clean up all the hardware. I'm going to wire wheel the camber adjustment bolts, and I'm going to lube them up. I'm going to do the same with my hub bolts, even though they're not very bad. I am just going to give them a quick wire wheel. The one that got slightly deformed, I would reuse it if I had to, but because I bought a set of 3 yesterday and only used 2, I'll go ahead and replace it. So here we are putting the upper control arm in. Because these bushings are brand new, it's a little tight. Might have to use a little force when you get one side in and push the other in, but it'll go. And then getting the bolts lined up, I use an awl. Get in there, get the hole lined up. If the awl doesn't work or doesn't fully get it, a bigger punch or pin will get it lined up. Then you can slide your bolt in there. Upper control arms in, everything's just finger tight. I'll tighten those up once it's all assembled. Got to clean the rust off of in here and there, and then everything's ready for assembly. These are the brake caliper bracket mounting bolts. You can see the factory used a thread locker. We're going to use thread locker as well, but anytime you're going to put a bolt back in that had thread locker in it, you got to clean that out. You got to wire wheel that off, otherwise it's not going to torque right. Here's our caliper mounting bracket bolt with some blue Loctite on it. Already got one finger threaded in there. Here's a little tip. Sometimes it can be hard getting this on with the rotor sitting on the lugs. It'll cock and sideways and make things difficult. Use an old nut, big nut that slides over the lug, and get a lug nut on there. This anchors everything. Get torqued to 130 pounds. Nice double click. Good to go. So here we are, everything's back together. Everything's been torqued. These were 90, 130. This is 90. This one is 30, and that one you can't really get a torque wrench on, so good and tight. And the collar pin will keep it. Too tight though, and you compress the ball joint too much, you damaged it. Wears out faster, but you just got to get it to a little over 30 is fine. So the last step here, I got to adjust my alignment, my camber, and then lock it down. So turning this, you see, will adjust my camber. So I'll do that on each side and tighten it up. You take a wrench on each side because as you tighten it, it'll lose its adjustment.